Sarah Martinez stepped out of her beat-up Honda Civic and stared at the sprawling concrete building that housed the Regional Police Training Academy. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, and she could already hear the distant sounds of gunfire from the outdoor ranges. Her stomach churned with a mixture of excitement and nervousness that she hadn't felt since her first day of college. At 28, Sarah was older than most of the other recruits. While they had come straight from high school or college, she had spent the last 6 years working as a social worker in some of the city's toughest neighborhoods. The decision to switch careers hadn't been easy, but after watching too many cases fall through the cracks of an overburdened system, she knew she wanted to make a difference from a different angle. The academy building was imposing, all steel and glass with American flags flanking the main entrance. Sarah grabbed her gym bag from the passenger seat and made her way toward the doors. Inside, the lobby was filled with the chatter of nervous recruits, all wearing the same gray academy t-shirts and black pants. She spotted a few familiar faces from orientation week, but most of the 40-person class was still getting acquainted. "Martinez!" a gruff voice called out from across the room. Sarah turned to see Sergeant Mike Brennan approaching. Brennan was a 25-year veteran of the force, with graying hair and shoulders that looked like they could support a small building. He carried himself with the kind of authority that came from years of commanding respect on both the streets and the training grounds. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, straightening her posture. "You're with Range Group C today. Report to Instructor Davis at Range 3 in 15 minutes. Don't be late." Brennan's tone was all business, but Sarah caught something else in his expression. Was it doubt? She couldn't be sure. Sarah made her way through the academy's corridors, passing classrooms where other groups were studying criminal law and police procedures. The building smelled like industrial cleaner and coffee, with an underlying hint of gun oil that seemed to permeate everything. She found the equipment room and was issued safety glasses, ear protection, and a tactical vest that felt heavier than it looked. Range 3 was located at the back of the complex, separated from the main building by a covered walkway. As Sarah approached, she could see Instructor Davis setting up targets downrange. Davis was younger than Brennan, probably in her late 30s, with short blonde hair and the kind of lean build that suggested she spent her free time running marathons. She wore the academy's instructor uniform with the confidence of someone who had earned every stripe on her sleeves. "Gather around," Davis called out as the 12 members of Range Group C assembled near the firing line. Sarah recognized about half of them from previous academy sessions. There was Jake Morrison, a former Marine who seemed to know everything about everything. Lisa Chen, a criminal justice graduate who quoted textbooks like scripture, and Tommy Rodriguez, whose father and grandfather had both been cops. Davis walked along the line of recruits, her sharp eyes taking in each face. "Today we begin firearms training. Some of you think you know how to shoot because you went hunting with your grandfather or played paintball in college. Forget everything you think you know. We're going to start from the beginning." She stopped in front of a table loaded with police-issue Glock 22 pistols. "These are .40 caliber service weapons. They will be your primary tool for protecting yourself and others. Respect them, maintain them, and they will serve you well. Treat them carelessly, and they will fail you when you need them most." The morning sun was getting higher, and Sarah could feel sweat beginning to form under her tactical vest. Davis began the safety briefing, covering the 4 fundamental rules of firearm safety with the methodical precision of someone who had given this speech hundreds of times. Sarah found herself hanging on every word, knowing that this knowledge could one day mean the difference between going home safely and not going home at all. After the safety briefing came the basics: stance, grip, sight alignment, and trigger control. Davis demonstrated each technique with the fluid motions of an expert, her shots consistently hitting the center of the target at 25 yards. When it came time for the recruits to try, the results were predictably mixed. Jake Morrison, drawing on his military experience, managed to put most of his shots in the target area, though they were scattered across the scoring rings. Lisa Chen struggled with the recoil, her shots pulling low and to the left. Tommy Rodriguez showed promise but rushed his shots, causing them to spray across the target face. Then it was Sarah's turn. Davis handed her a Glock 22, and immediately Sarah noticed something was off. The grip felt loose in her hands, and when she examined the weapon more closely, she could see that the rear sight was visibly canted to the right. The sight had obviously taken a hit during training and was now sitting at an angle that would make accurate shooting nearly impossible. "Instructor Davis," Sarah said, raising her hand, "I think there might be an issue with this pistol." Davis walked over and glanced at the weapon. "What kind of issue?" "The rear sight appears to be damaged. It's tilted to the right by what looks like about 15 degrees. Davis took the pistol and examined it briefly. Sarah could see recognition flash across the instructor's face, but instead of switching out the weapon, Davis handed it back. "The sight is fine, Martinez. Perhaps you should focus less on making excuses and more on fundamentals." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Several of the other recruits snickered, and she could see Jake Morrison shaking his head in amusement. She wanted to argue, to point out that the sight was clearly damaged, but challenging an instructor on her first day of weapons training seemed like a recipe for disaster. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied, accepting the pistol back. Davis pointed toward lane 7. 25 yards, 10 rounds, let's see what you can do." Sarah walked to the firing line, her mind racing. The sight was damaged, she was certain of that, but Davis was an experienced instructor who surely knew her weapons better than a rookie recruit. Maybe Sarah was wrong. Maybe her nervousness was making her see problems that weren't there. She took her position at lane 7 and examined the target downrange. 25 yards might as well have been 25 miles with a damaged sight. The black silhouette target looked impossibly small through the tilted rear sight notch. Behind her, she could hear the other recruits continuing their shooting exercises. The range echoed with the sharp crack of .40 caliber rounds and the metallic ping of spent brass hitting the concrete. The smell of gunpowder hung in the warm air, and Sarah found herself taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. She thought about her years as a social worker, dealing with situations where she had to stay calm under pressure. She remembered sitting across from angry parents, de-escalating domestic disputes, and finding creative solutions when the obvious approaches didn't work. This was just another problem that needed solving. If the sight was tilted to the right, then she would need to compensate by aiming to the left. But how much? 15 degrees of sight misalignment could throw shots off by several inches at 25 yards. She would have to guess and adjust based on her first few shots. Sarah chambered around and took her stance. The weight of the pistol felt familiar in her hands, though she couldn't quite place why. She aligned the tilted rear sight with the front sight post and aimed at the center of the target, then deliberately adjusted her point of aim to the left. The first shot surprised her with its clarity. Despite the damaged sight, she had managed to hit the target in the 8 ring, just left of center. Not perfect, but respectable for a first shot with unfamiliar equipment. Davis appeared beside her, clipboard in hand. "Not bad for your first shot, Martinez, but you're pulling to the left. Adjust your grip pressure." Sarah nodded, but didn't adjust her grip. She had deliberately aimed to the left to compensate for the sight. If Davis thought she was pulling shots, then Sarah was on the right track. She needed to aim even further left. The second shot hit the 9 ring, closer to center. The third shot found the 10 ring. By her fourth shot, Sarah had found her rhythm. She was holding slightly left of where the sights wanted to track and squeezing the trigger straight back with steady pressure. Shot after shot, the bullets found their mark. The damaged sight that should have made accurate shooting impossible became just another variable to account for. Sarah fell into a zone where everything else faded away except for the front sight post, the target, and the steady pressure of her finger on the trigger. When the shooting stopped, Sarah engaged the pistol's safety and stepped back from the firing line. The range fell unusually quiet, and she realized that the other recruits had stopped their own shooting to watch her. Davis activated the target retrieval system, and Sarah's target came sliding back down the range toward them. As it got closer, Sarah could see the tight cluster of holes in the center of the silhouette. All 10 shots had found the 10 ring, with several overlapping in the X ring at the very center of the target. The silence stretched for several seconds. Davis stared at the target, then at Sarah, then back at the target. The instructor's face had gone noticeably pale, and Sarah could see her hands trembling slightly as she held the clipboard. "How long have you been shooting, Martinez?" Davis asked, her voice carefully controlled. "I haven't," Sarah replied honestly. "This is my first time firing a pistol." Davis looked at the Glock 22 in Sarah's hands, really examined it this time. She could now clearly see the damaged rear sight that Sarah had pointed out earlier. The sight was not just tilted, but actually cracked at the base, held in place by little more than friction and hope. "This sight is completely out of alignment," Davis said, more to herself than to Sarah. "These shots should be impossible with this equipment." Jake Morrison leaned over to get a better look at Sarah's target. "Holy shit," he whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She shot a perfect group with a busted gun." Davis shot him a warning look for the profanity, but didn't correct his assessment. She walked over to the pistol rack and selected another Glock 22, this one with properly aligned sights. "Martinez, I want you to shoot another group. Use this weapon." Sarah accepted the new pistol and could immediately feel the difference. The sights were crisp and properly aligned, the grip tight and secure. She returned to the firing line and set up another target at 25 yards. This time, she didn't need to compensate for equipment failure. She simply aimed at the center of the target and let her training take over. Except she realized she didn't have any formal training. What she was doing came from somewhere deeper. Some combination of natural ability and muscle memory that she couldn't quite explain. 10 more shots, 10 more hits in the 10 ring. This group was even tighter than the first, with several shots actually touching each other around the X ring. The target looked like it had been attacked by a hole punch rather than shot with a pistol from 25 yards away. When Davis retrieved this second target, her pallor had become even more pronounced. She stared at Sarah with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been fear. "Martinez," she said slowly, "have you ever fired any type of weapon before? Rifles, shotguns, air guns?" Sarah searched her memory honestly. "No, ma'am. My family wasn't into hunting or shooting sports. I grew up in the city." Davis nodded slowly, though she looked like she was having trouble processing this information. "I want you to step aside for a moment. Let's continue with the rest of the group." For the next hour, Sarah watched as her fellow recruits struggled through their shooting exercises. Even Jake Morrison, with his military background, couldn't consistently keep his shots in the scoring rings at 25 yards. Lisa Chen improved with coaching but was still hitting more paper than target. Tommy Rodriguez showed gradual improvement, but his groups remained loose and scattered. Throughout the session, Sarah could feel Davis watching her. The instructor would demonstrate techniques for the other recruits, then glance in Sarah's direction as if trying to solve a puzzle. When recruits asked questions about sight alignment or trigger control, Davis would answer automatically, while her attention remained focused on Sarah. As the morning session wound down, Davis called the group together for a debrief. She went through the standard points about safety, practice, and gradual improvement. But when she got to Sarah's performance, she seemed to struggle for words. "Martinez demonstrated some natural ability today," Davis said finally. "However, I want everyone to remember that shooting is a perishable skill. Natural talent means nothing without consistent practice and proper training." The warning seemed directed more at Sarah than at the group, though Sarah wasn't sure why. She had followed all instructions, maintained proper safety protocols, and achieved good results. Why did Davis seem so concerned about her performance? After the group was dismissed, Davis approached Sarah as she was cleaning up her shooting station. "Martinez, I want to see you back here at 1400 hours for additional training." "Yes, ma'am. Is there a problem with my performance?" Davis studied her for a long moment. "That's what I intend to find out." As Sarah walked back toward the academy's main building, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had crossed some kind of line. The other recruits gave her a wide berth, their earlier friendliness replaced by something that felt like suspicion. Jake Morrison, who had been chatty during equipment issue, now avoided eye contact entirely. In the locker room, Sarah overheard Lisa Chen talking to another recruit. "Did you see those targets? Nobody shoots like that on their first day. She's got to have training somewhere." "Maybe military background she's not talking about," came the reply. "Or maybe she grew up around guns and doesn't want to admit it." Sarah wanted to defend herself, to explain that she was just as surprised by her performance as everyone else. But something held her back. The truth was, she didn't understand what had happened on the range any better than they did. The shooting had felt natural, almost instinctive, but she genuinely had no previous experience with firearms. She changed out of her training gear and headed to the academy cafeteria for lunch, but found herself picking at her food without appetite. The morning had started with such promise, but now she felt isolated from her fellow recruits and under suspicious scrutiny from the instructors. At exactly 1400 hours, Sarah reported back to Range 3. Davis was waiting for her with a different selection of weapons laid out on the table. Along with the standard Glock 22, there was a revolver, a rifle, and what looked like a precision target pistol. "Today we're going to explore the extent of your natural ability," Davis said, making air quotes around the last two words. "I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with here." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The way Davis spoke made it sound like she was a problem to be solved rather than a recruit to be trained. But she nodded and approached the firing line. "Let's start with the revolver," Davis said, handing Sarah a Smith & Wesson .38 Special. "Different trigger, different grip, different recoil characteristics." Sarah had never seen a revolver up close, but the weapon felt comfortable in her hands. Davis walked her through the basics of loading and operation, then set up a target at 15 yards. 6 shots, Davis instructed. Sarah took her stance and lined up the sights. The revolver's trigger was heavier than the Glock's, requiring more pressure to fire. But she adapted quickly, and all 6 shots found the 10 ring with mechanical precision. Davis's expression grew grimmer. "Let's try the rifle." The AR-15 was completely different from the handguns, with a longer sight radius and different shooting position. But again, Sarah adapted quickly. Her 5-shot group at 50 yards could have been covered with a quarter. By the time they got to the precision target pistol, Davis was no longer bothering to hide her concern. Sarah's shooting with the match-grade .22 caliber pistol was so accurate that it seemed to defy the laws of physics. Every shot hit exactly where she aimed, with groups so tight they looked like single enlarged holes. "Martinez," Davis said, setting down her clipboard with hands that were visibly shaking. "I need you to tell me the truth. Have you ever received any kind of shooting instruction? Military, police, civilian instructors, anything?" "No, ma'am," Sarah replied honestly. "I understand why you're asking, but I've never fired a gun before today." Davis stared at her for a long moment, then walked over to a locked cabinet and retrieved what appeared to be a heavily modified pistol. The weapon had an extended barrel, adjustable sights, and custom grips that marked it as a serious competition gun. "This is my personal match pistol," Davis said. "I've been competing in precision shooting for 15 years. This gun is zeroed specifically for my shooting style and has probably $5,000 in modifications. I want you to try shooting it." Sarah accepted the pistol carefully. Even without technical knowledge, she could tell this was a precision instrument. The balance was perfect, the trigger broke like glass, and the sights were the clearest she had used all day. Davis set up a new target at 50 yards and marked it with specific scoring zones. 10 shots. I want to see what you can do with proper equipment. Sarah took her position and began firing. Each shot felt perfect as it left the barrel, and she could almost see the bullets tracking toward their intended points of impact. When she finished, the target showed 10 shots clustered in an area smaller than a dime, all within the highest scoring ring. Davis retrieved the target and stared at it in silence for nearly a minute. When she looked back at Sarah, her face had gone completely white. "Martinez," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "this is the kind of shooting I see from Olympic-level competitors. Masters-level shooters with decades of experience." Sarah didn't know how to respond. She understood that her performance was unusual, but she had no frame of reference for just how unusual it was. Davis walked back to the equipment table and began packing up the weapons with mechanical movements. "I'm going to need to report this to Sergeant Brennan. He'll want to see these targets." "Am I in trouble?" Sarah asked. Davis looked at her with an expression that was part confusion, part fear, and part something that might have been awe. "I honestly don't know." The next morning, Sarah arrived at the academy to find Sergeant Brennan waiting for her in the lobby. His expression was unreadable, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made Sarah's stomach tighten with apprehension. He gestured for her to follow him without saying a word. They walked through corridors Sarah hadn't seen before, past offices marked with titles like Background Investigations and Internal Affairs. Finally, Brennan stopped at a door labeled Conference Room B and motioned for her to enter. Inside, Sarah found herself facing a panel of 3 people. Davis was there, along with a woman in a business suit who introduced herself as Dr. Patricia Kellerman from the Academy's Psychological Services Department. The third person was a man Sarah didn't recognize, wearing the uniform of a police captain with more ribbons and commendations on his chest than Sarah had ever seen. "Martinez," Brennan said, taking a seat across from her. "This is Captain Reynolds from the department's Special Operations Division. We need to ask you some questions about yesterday's performance on the range." Sarah felt like she was on trial, though she couldn't understand what crime she might have committed. "Of course, sir. I'll answer anything I can." Dr. Kellerman opened a thick folder and spread several documents across the table. Sarah could see copies of her academy application, background investigation reports, and what appeared to be psychological evaluation forms. "Sarah, we've reviewed your background extensively," Dr. Kellerman began in a voice that managed to be both professional and warm. "You've been completely honest about your lack of firearms experience. Your employment history, educational background, and personal references all confirm that you have no military or law enforcement training." Captain Reynolds leaned forward, "which makes yesterday's shooting performance impossible to explain through conventional means." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "I understand it was unusual, but I don't see why that's a problem. Isn't good marksmanship a positive thing for a police officer?" "Good marksmanship, yes," Reynolds replied. "Olympic-level precision with damaged equipment on your first day of training raises different questions entirely." Davis slid a manila envelope across the table. "These are the targets from yesterday, along with some additional information about the weapons you used." Sarah opened the envelope and found her targets from the previous day, along with what appeared to be technical reports. She could see measurements and calculations written in the margins of the papers. "The damaged Glock you used yesterday," Davis explained, "had a rear sight that was misaligned by approximately 18 degrees. Our weapons technician ran ballistics tests this morning. With that degree of sight damage, an expert marksman would struggle to hit the target at all from 25 yards. Dr. Kellerman consulted her notes. Your subsequent shooting with properly functioning weapons showed consistency that we typically see only in professional competitors or special operations personnel with years of training. Captain Reynolds spread out additional documents. We've checked with every shooting range, training facility, and gun store within a 100-mile radius. Nobody has any record of you receiving instruction or even purchasing ammunition. Sarah stared at the papers, feeling increasingly overwhelmed. I don't know what you want me to tell you. I've been completely honest about my experience, which is none. We believe you, Dr. Kellerman said gently. That's what makes this so concerning. Brennan cleared his throat. Martinez, there are only a few explanations for this kind of natural shooting ability. Some people theorize about genetic predisposition to hand-eye coordination and spatial awareness. Others point to subconscious training from video games or simulation activities. And some, Captain Reynolds added grimly, suggest more troubling possibilities. Sarah felt a chill run through her. What kind of troubling possibilities? Reynolds exchanged glances with the other panel members. Foreign military training, deep cover operations, individuals placed in civilian populations with false identities and suppressed memories of their actual backgrounds. The room fell silent. Sarah stared at Reynolds, wondering if she had heard him correctly. Are you suggesting that I'm some kind of spy? We're not suggesting anything, Dr. Kellerman said quickly. We're simply exploring all possible explanations for an unprecedented situation. Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. I'm a social worker from the city who decided to become a police officer. I went to State University, worked for the Department of Social Services, and my most exciting secret is that I sometimes eat ice cream for breakfast. Sit down, Martinez, Brennan said firmly. We're not accusing you of anything. We're trying to understand a situation that none of us have encountered before. Sarah remained standing, her hands clenched into fists. You want to understand? So do I. Yesterday I discovered I can apparently shoot better than people who've been training for decades, and I have no idea why. Do you think this isn't confusing and frightening for me, too? The panel exchanged looks, and Sarah could see some of the tension leave their faces. Dr. Kellerman made notes on her pad. Sarah, she said gently, would you be willing to undergo some additional testing? Not interrogation, but some cognitive and physical assessments that might help us understand your abilities better. What kind of testing? Captain Reynolds answered. Hand-eye coordination evaluations, reaction time measurements, spatial reasoning assessments. We want to see if your shooting ability is part of a broader pattern of enhanced physical capabilities. Sarah sat back down slowly. And if I refuse? Then you'll be dismissed from the academy, Brennan said bluntly. We can't graduate police officers when we don't understand the full extent of their capabilities or potential background. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Sarah had already invested too much in this career change to give up now. Fine, but I want to understand what's happening to me as much as you do. Dr. Kellerman smiled for the first time since the meeting began. We'll start this afternoon. In the meantime, you'll continue with your regular academy training schedule. As Sarah left the conference room, she felt like she was walking through a dream. Everything that had seemed clear and straightforward about her life now felt uncertain and strange. She made her way to the academy's main classroom for constitutional law instruction, but found it impossible to concentrate on search and seizure procedures when her entire identity was being questioned. During lunch break, Sarah sat alone at a corner table in the cafeteria. The other recruits gave her an even wider berth than the day before. She could see them whispering and glancing in her direction, and she didn't need to strain to catch fragments of their conversations. Heard they brought in investigators? Thinks she might be some kind of ringer? Nobody shoots like that naturally. Jake Morrison approached her table cautiously, as if she might be armed. Hey, Martinez, mind if I ask you something? Sarah looked up from her untouched sandwich. Sure. Are you really telling the truth about never shooting before? He sat down across from her, keeping his voice low. Because if you are, that's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And if you're not, I don't understand why you'd lie about it. Sarah appreciated his directness. I'm telling the truth, Jake. I'm just as confused as everyone else. He studied her face carefully. You know what's weird? I believe you. My dad was a sniper in Vietnam, and he always said that the best natural shooters were usually the most surprised by their own abilities. What do you mean? He said that exceptional marksmanship requires a kind of mental state that most people have to train for years to achieve. Complete focus, emotional control, perfect hand-eye coordination. But some people just naturally think that way. Sarah felt a spark of hope. So this isn't completely unprecedented? Jake shrugged. Rare as hell, but not impossible. The military services specifically test for natural shooting ability during recruitment. They call them genetic marksmen. That afternoon, Sarah reported to a different building on the academy complex. Dr. Kellerman met her in a laboratory-style room filled with computer equipment and testing apparatus that looked more like a research facility than a police training center. We're going to start with some basic coordination tests, Dr. Kellerman explained. Nothing stressful, just measurements of your reaction times and hand-eye coordination. The first series of tests involved computer simulations, where Sarah had to track moving targets on screens and respond to visual stimuli. The results showed reaction times that were significantly faster than normal, with accuracy scores in the 99th percentile. Next came physical coordination tests using specialized equipment that measured her ability to perform precise movements under time pressure. Again, her scores were exceptional, showing the kind of fine motor control typically seen in professional athletes or skilled craftspeople. These results are consistent with your shooting performance, Dr. Kellerman noted, reviewing printouts from the testing equipment. You have unusually well-developed spatial awareness and motor control capabilities. But where did they come from? Sarah asked. I was never particularly athletic or coordinated growing up. Dr. Kellerman pulled up a chair. Let's talk about your childhood. Sometimes abilities like this develop in response to specific experiences or environmental factors. For the next hour, Sarah found herself recounting her early years in detail. She had grown up in a working-class neighborhood with her mother after her father left when she was 5. Money had been tight, and Sarah had spent much of her childhood being responsible for herself while her mother worked 2 jobs. Tell me about activities you enjoyed as a child, Dr. Kellerman prompted. Sarah thought carefully. I liked puzzles. Jigsaw puzzles, word puzzles, brain teasers. My mom couldn't afford many toys, but she would buy puzzle books from the grocery store. What about physical activities? I wasn't into sports, but I enjoyed things that required precision. I taught myself to juggle using tennis balls I found in a dumpster. I practiced for hours until I could keep 5 balls in the air. Dr. Kellerman made notes. Juggling is excellent training for hand-eye coordination and spatial awareness. What else? Sarah searched her memory. I used to throw rocks at targets. Not at windows or anything destructive, but at specific spots on trees or fence posts. I would challenge myself to hit smaller and smaller targets from greater distances. How often did you practice this? Almost every day after school. It was something to do while I waited for my mom to get home from work. Dr. Kellerman's pen stopped moving. Sarah, you essentially gave yourself years of precision training during your childhood. Rock throwing is one of the fundamental skills that translates directly to marksmanship. Sarah felt a surge of understanding. You mean all that time I spent aiming at targets with rocks was actually training me to shoot? In a sense, yes. You developed exceptional hand-eye coordination, spatial awareness, and the ability to calculate trajectory and distance. When you picked up a firearm, your brain already knew how to process all the variables involved in accurate shooting. For the first time since this whole situation began, Sarah felt like she was getting answers that made sense. So I'm not some kind of genetic freak or undercover agent? Dr. Kellerman smiled. You're someone who inadvertently gave yourself world-class training in fundamental marksmanship skills during childhood, then forgot that the training was relevant until you encountered a similar task as an adult. That evening, Sarah returned to her apartment feeling more settled than she had in days. The explanation wasn't completely satisfying, but it was better than the alternatives that had been suggested. She called her mother to ask about her childhood rock-throwing activities. "Oh, honey, you were obsessed with that," her mother laughed over the phone. "You would come home from school and immediately go outside to practice hitting things with stones. I used to worry you'd break someone's window, but you were always so careful about what you aimed at." "Do you remember how accurate I was?" "Accurate? Sarah, you could hit a bottle cap from 50 feet away. I watched you do it dozens of times. You made it look effortless." Sarah felt another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. She had indeed received extensive training in precision targeting. She had just never thought of childhood games as training before. The next morning at the academy, word had somehow spread about her testing results. Captain Reynolds approached her during morning formation with something that might have been respect in his expression. "Martinez, Dr. Kellerman briefed us on your background evaluation. It appears we owe you an apology for the more exotic theories we considered." "Thank you, sir. However," Reynolds continued, "your shooting abilities are still extraordinary, regardless of their origin. We'd like to propose some additional training opportunities." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of opportunities?" "Our department is forming a new precision marksman unit for specialized operations. SWAT-level training, counter-sniper work, high-stakes hostage situations. With your natural abilities and proper training, you could be ready for that level of assignment in half the normal time." The offer was tempting, but Sarah needed to think carefully. "What would that mean for my regular police academy training?" "You'd continue with your standard academy schedule, but add specialized shooting instruction during off hours. If you decide to pursue this path, you'd graduate to patrol duties initially, but with an accelerated track toward specialized units." Sarah looked around at her fellow recruits, who were watching this conversation with obvious interest. Some looked envious, others skeptical, but she could see that her relationship with the class had fundamentally changed. "Can I have some time to consider this?" "Of course, but I'll need an answer by the end of the week." As Reynolds walked away, Jake Morrison approached her. "Specialized marksman training? That's pretty intense. I haven't decided anything yet." "You know what my dad told me about exceptional shooters?" Jake asked. "He said the challenge isn't learning to shoot well. It's learning to live with being different from everyone else." Sarah didn't fully understand what he meant until later that day, during regular firearms training. Davis had returned to normal instruction mode, but Sarah could feel the weight of everyone's attention every time she approached the firing line. Her shots continued to be remarkably accurate, but now that accuracy felt like a burden rather than an achievement. The other recruits treated her with a mixture of awe and suspicion that made normal conversation almost impossible. She found herself eating alone, studying alone, and walking to classes by herself while groups of other recruits chatted and bonded around her. During afternoon shooting practice, Davis assigned Sarah to work with a different group that was practicing more advanced techniques. These were recruits who had prior military or competitive shooting experience, and Sarah found herself surrounded by people who had earned their skills through years of dedicated practice. "Martinez," Davis called out, "I want you to try some shooting positions you haven't used before. Let's see how your natural abilities translate to more challenging scenarios." For the next 2 hours, Sarah found herself shooting from prone positions, around barricades, and with her non-dominant hand. Each new challenge felt like a puzzle to solve. and her brain seemed to automatically calculate the adjustments needed for each situation. When she consistently scored perfect or near-perfect groups from every position, the experienced recruits began asking detailed questions about her technique and training background. Sarah found herself trying to explain abilities that she didn't fully understand herself. "It's like the gun becomes an extension of my hand," she attempted to describe. "I can feel where the bullet will go before I pull the trigger." One of the former Marines nodded thoughtfully. "That's called kinesthetic awareness. Most shooters train for years to develop that kind of sensitivity." "But how did you develop it without training?" asked a recruit who had competed in college shooting sports. Sarah had no good answer. Even with Dr. Kellerman's explanation about childhood rock throwing, the level of precision she demonstrated seemed to exceed what that background could account for. As the day's training concluded, Davis pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "Martinez, I want to apologize for my skepticism yesterday. Your abilities are genuine and they're remarkable." "Thank you, Instructor. But I also want to give you some advice. Exceptional ability comes with exceptional responsibility. If you choose to pursue specialized training, you'll be held to higher standards than anyone else. People will expect perfection from you in every situation." Sarah nodded, beginning to understand the weight of Jake's father's warning about being different. "There's something else," Davis continued. "I've been authorized to offer you access to our advanced training facilities this weekend. Private instruction, high-end equipment, scenarios that will really test your capabilities." "What kind of scenarios?" Davis smiled, but there was something serious in her expression. "The kind that will determine whether you're ready for the level of responsibility that comes with abilities like yours." That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment staring at the phone number Captain Reynolds had given her for specialized unit recruitment. She thought about her original goals in joining the police force: helping people, making a difference in the community, having a stable career that would let her build a better life. None of those goals had involved becoming some kind of super soldier or elite marksman. But she was beginning to realize that her abilities wouldn't let her remain an ordinary police officer, even if that's what she wanted. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was her mother. "Sarah, I've been thinking about our conversation last night, about your rock throwing when you were little." "What about it?" "I remembered something else. You used to talk about feeling like you could see exactly where the rock would go before you threw it. You said it was like having a map in your head." Sarah felt a chill of recognition. That was exactly how shooting felt to her now. "Mom, did I ever talk about dreams or anything unusual when I was practicing?" "Well, now that you mention it, you used to have very vivid dreams about being a soldier or a hunter. You would wake up and tell me detailed stories about using bows and arrows and old-fashioned rifles. I always thought you had quite an imagination." Sarah hung up the phone feeling more confused than ever. The pieces of her childhood that she had dismissed as ordinary now seemed to form a pattern that she couldn't quite understand. The rock throwing, the dreams, the instinctive precision that had emerged the moment she held a firearm. She looked at Captain Reynolds' phone number again. Whatever was happening to her, whatever she was becoming, she knew she couldn't figure it out alone. She needed training, guidance, and answers that only the specialized unit could provide. But she also knew that once she made that phone call, there would be no going back to the simple dream of being an ordinary police officer helping people in ordinary ways. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, with fog hanging low over the academy grounds. Sarah drove through the main gate at 7 a.m., noting that the parking lot was nearly empty except for a few instructor vehicles. The advanced training session Davis had arranged would be conducted away from the regular academy activities, in facilities that Sarah hadn't seen before. She found Davis waiting for her outside a building marked Special Operations Training Center. The instructor looked different in civilian clothes, more approachable, but somehow more serious at the same time. "Ready for this?" Davis asked as Sarah approached. "I think so. What exactly are we doing today?" Davis led her toward the building entrance. "We're going to find out what you're really capable of. No more basic marksmanship. Today we test your limits." Inside, the facility was unlike anything Sarah had seen at the academy. The space was arranged like a complex obstacle course, with multiple shooting positions, moving targets, and what appeared to be simulated building structures. Computer monitors lined one wall, displaying real-time data from sensors placed throughout the range. "This is where we train our SWAT teams and special operations units," Davis explained. "The scenarios you'll face today are designed to replicate real-world situations where split-second accuracy can mean the difference between saving lives and losing them." Captain Reynolds emerged from a control booth, followed by a man Sarah didn't recognize. The stranger wore tactical gear and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. "Martinez, this is Detective Ray Kowalski from our Metro SWAT team," Reynolds said. "He's here to evaluate your potential for specialized operations." Kowalski shook Sarah's hand with a grip that felt like it could crush walnuts. "I've heard interesting things about your shooting," he said. "Today we find out if those skills translate to real-world applications." Davis handed Sarah a tactical vest and equipment belt, loaded with magazines and gear she had never used before. "Today you'll be using our full-service weapons system. Everything from close-quarters pistol work to precision rifle shots at extended ranges." The first scenario involved a hostage simulation. Sarah found herself facing a complex target array where cardboard hostages were positioned close to armed threat targets. The challenge was to neutralize the threats while avoiding any hits on innocent bystanders. "You have 60 seconds, Kowalski announced. "Multiple threats, limited ammunition, civilian safety is paramount." Sarah studied the layout for a moment, her mind automatically calculating angles and shot placement. When the buzzer sounded, she moved through the course with fluid precision. Each shot was deliberate and controlled, taking down threat targets with headshots that left the hostage figures untouched. When time expired, Kowalski walked the course, checking each target. "Perfect threat elimination," he called out. "No civilian casualties. Ammunition expenditure, minimal." Reynolds was making notes on his clipboard, but Sarah could see surprise in his expression. "Let's try something more challenging." The second scenario was a moving target exercise. Mechanical devices sent human silhouette targets racing along tracks at varying speeds and distances, while Sarah had to engage them from different positions and with different weapons. Again, Sarah found herself operating on pure instinct. The moving targets seemed to slow down in her perception, allowing her to track their motion and lead them perfectly with each shot. When the exercise concluded, she had achieved a perfect hit rate on targets moving at speeds that would challenge experienced SWAT officers. "This is unprecedented," Davis murmured, reviewing the computer scoring data. Kowalski's expression had grown increasingly serious as the morning progressed. "Martinez, I need you to try something that we normally don't attempt until officers have months of specialized training." He led her to a different section of the facility where a precision rifle was set up on a bench rest. The target was positioned at what Sarah estimated to be several hundred yards downrange, almost at the limit of her vision. "This is a .308 caliber precision rifle," Kowalski explained. "The target is at 400 yards. Wind conditions are variable. Most SWAT snipers train for months before attempting shots at this distance under these conditions." Sarah examined the rifle, noting its weight and balance. The optic sight was far more complex than anything she had used before, with multiple adjustment knobs and reticle markings that she didn't understand. "I don't know how to use this scope," she admitted. Kowalski spent 15 minutes explaining the basics of the telescopic sight, including how to account for bullet drop and wind drift at extended ranges. Sarah listened carefully, but found herself absorbing the information with an ease that surprised her. When she finally settled behind the rifle, everything felt familiar, despite the complexity of the equipment. She could sense the wind patterns, feel the rifle's natural point of aim, and visualize the bullet's trajectory as clearly as if she were watching it in slow motion. The first shot hit dead center on the target. The second shot overlapped the first hole. By the fifth shot, she had created a group so tight that Kowalski had to use binoculars to confirm that she had actually fired multiple rounds. "That's impossible," Reynolds said flatly. "Nobody shoots groups like that at 400 yards without extensive training." Kowalski lowered his binoculars and stared at Sarah. "I've been a precision marksman for 12 years. I've trained with military snipers, FBI sharpshooters, and international competitors. What you just did shouldn't be possible for someone with your background." Sarah set down the rifle and turned to face the group of observers. "I keep hearing that what I'm doing is impossible, but I'm doing it. Maybe we need to expand our definition of what's possible." Dr. Kellerman, who had arrived during the rifle shooting, stepped forward with a tablet computer. "Sarah, I'd like to try one more test. This one is different from anything you've done so far." She led Sarah to a computer terminal with what appeared to be a video game interface. "This is a virtual reality simulator that we use to test decision-making under pressure. You'll face scenarios where shooting accuracy is only part of the challenge." Sarah put on the VR headset and found herself standing in a virtual bank lobby during what appeared to be a robbery in progress. She could see hostages cowering behind desks while multiple armed suspects moved through the scene. The challenge was not just to neutralize threats, but to do so in the correct order and timing to maximize civilian safety. The simulation was incredibly realistic, complete with the sounds of panicked civilians and shouted commands from the suspects. Sarah had to process multiple streams of information simultaneously: suspect positions, civilian locations, background considerations, and the complex geometry of safe shot placement. When the simulation ended, Dr. Kellerman reviewed the data with obvious amazement. Perfect tactical decisions, optimal target prioritization, and flawless shot placement. The computer rates this performance as expert level. Reynolds sat down heavily in a nearby chair. "Martinez, I need to ask you something directly, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." "Yes, sir?" "Have you ever experienced anything that might be considered unusual? Dreams, visions, memories that don't seem to belong to your actual experiences?" Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She thought about her mother's comments regarding childhood dreams of being a soldier. What kind of memories? Knowledge of weapons, tactics, or combat situations that you shouldn't have based on your actual life experiences? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes when I'm shooting, I feel like I've done it before. Not just similar things, but exactly the same movements, the same decisions, like muscle memory for things I've never actually done." Kowalski and Reynolds exchanged meaningful looks. Dr. Kellerman made notes on her tablet. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "When I was a child, I used to have very detailed dreams about being in military situations, using weapons, following tactics, making decisions in combat scenarios. My mother always said I had a vivid imagination." "Can you describe these dreams?" Dr. Kellerman asked. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to recall details she had dismissed years ago. "I was always in different time periods, sometimes with modern weapons like today, sometimes with older equipment, Civil War-era rifles, World War II scenarios, even medieval settings with bows and crossbows. But the feeling was always the same: complete confidence in my ability to hit any target under any conditions." The room fell silent. Reynolds and Kowalski moved to a corner and began a whispered conversation that Sarah couldn't overhear. Davis approached her with a concerned expression. "Sarah, how do you feel about what's been happening? The attention, the testing, the implications for your future?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Honestly, it's overwhelming. A week ago, I thought I was just changing careers. Now I feel like I'm discovering that I'm someone completely different than I thought I was. Do you want to continue with police training? I do. But I'm beginning to understand that my path might not be what I originally planned. Captain Reynolds returned from his conversation with Kowalski. Martinez, we'd like to offer you a position in our Specialized Operations Unit, effective immediately upon graduation from the Academy. What would that involve? Advanced tactical training, precision marksman certification, and assignment to our most challenging cases. Hostage situations, counter-sniper operations, high-risk warrant service. Sarah looked around the advanced training facility, thinking about how natural everything had felt despite its complexity. What about regular patrol duty? Community policing? You'd still have opportunities for community engagement, Reynolds assured her. But your primary assignment would be specialized operations, where your unique abilities can save lives. Kowalski stepped forward. Martinez, I've worked with the best shooters in law enforcement and the military. What you demonstrated today places you in the top 1% of marksmen I've ever encountered. With proper training, you could become one of the most effective tactical operators in the country. The weight of their expectations felt enormous. Sarah had joined the police academy, hoping to help people in her community, not to become some kind of elite warrior. Can I ask you something? Sarah said to the group. Do you think my abilities are entirely natural, or is there something else going on that we don't understand? Dr. Kellerman consulted her notes. Your childhood experiences with precision activities provide some explanation, but the level of ability you've demonstrated goes beyond what that background would typically produce. What's your professional opinion? I think you have a combination of natural neurological advantages and unconscious training that created exceptional potential. But there may be other factors at work that we don't fully understand yet. Reynolds cleared his throat. Martinez, there are aspects of your case that we're still investigating. Government databases, military records, genetic research programs. Some of the things you've demonstrated today suggest capabilities that go beyond normal human parameters. Sarah felt a chill of fear. Are you saying I might not be entirely normal? We're saying that you represent capabilities that are extremely rare and potentially very valuable, Kowalski replied. Whether that's due to genetics, training, or other factors, the result is the same. You have abilities that could save lives and serve your community in ways that most officers never could. Sarah walked over to the window and looked out at the academy grounds where her fellow recruits were probably enjoying their weekend break. She thought about the simple dream of helping people that had brought her here, and how that dream had evolved into something much more complex and demanding. If I accept this position, she said finally, will I still be able to have a normal life? Friends, family, relationships? Davis answered honestly. It will be challenging. Specialized operations work is demanding, and the responsibilities can be isolating. But many of our officers maintain fulfilling personal lives. Sarah turned back to face the group. I need some time to think about this. Of course, Reynolds said. But I should mention that opportunities like this are extremely rare. We may not be able to offer the same level of specialized training and support if you decide to pursue a traditional police career path. That evening, Sarah called her mother again. This time, she asked more specific questions about her childhood dreams and behaviors. Mom, you said I used to have dreams about being a soldier in different time periods. Did I ever mention specific details about weapons or tactics? Oh, honey, you were so detailed it was almost scary. You would describe loading procedures for old rifles, talk about wind patterns affecting arrow flight, explain military formations from history books I know you had never read. Did that concern you? A little, but the child psychologist I consulted said that some children have very active imaginations and can create elaborate fantasy worlds that feel real to them. She said you would probably grow out of it. But I didn't really grow out of it, did I? The dreams just stopped, but the knowledge seems to have stayed buried until now. Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, are you okay? You sound worried." "I'm fine, Mom. I'm just trying to understand some things about myself that I never paid attention to before." After hanging up, Sarah sat in her apartment thinking about the choice she faced. She could accept the specialized position and embrace whatever she was becoming, with all the responsibilities and isolation that might entail. Or she could try to minimize her abilities and pursue a more traditional path, knowing that she would always wonder what she might have accomplished. Monday morning at the academy, Sarah found Captain Reynolds waiting for her before classes began. "Have you made your decision?" he asked. Sarah looked around at her fellow recruits, who were chatting and joking as they prepared for another day of training. She realized that she had been trying to fit into their world when she actually belonged somewhere else entirely. "I'll accept the position," she said, "but I have conditions." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "What kind of conditions?" "I want to finish the regular academy training with my class. I don't want special treatment that separates me from the other recruits more than necessary." "Agreed. And I want regular assignments that keep me connected to community policing. I didn't become a cop to hide in specialized units. I want to help ordinary people with ordinary problems." Reynolds smiled. "Also agreed? Anything else?" Sarah thought about her mother's stories and the dreams that had shaped her childhood without her understanding their significance. "I want to know the truth about what I am. If there are government programs or genetic research or anything else that might explain my abilities, I want full disclosure." Reynolds' expression became more serious. "That may take time. And some of the answers might be classified or difficult to accept." "I understand, but I can't move forward without knowing who I really am." "Fair enough." Reynolds extended his hand. "Welcome to the team, Officer Martinez." As they shook hands, Sarah felt a sense of resolution that she hadn't experienced since this whole journey began. She wasn't just Sarah Martinez, former social worker turned police recruit anymore. She was something new, something that she didn't fully understand yet, but was ready to explore. Over the following weeks, Sarah continued her regular academy training while beginning supplementary instruction with the Specialized Operations Unit. She learned advanced tactical procedures, studied ballistics and wind reading, and practiced scenarios that pushed her abilities to new limits. The other recruits gradually adjusted to her presence, though she remained somewhat apart from the group. Jake Morrison became a genuine friend, often seeking her advice on shooting techniques and sharing stories from his father's military service. Lisa Chen began asking for study help with academy coursework, finding that Sarah's analytical approach to problems extended beyond marksmanship. Davis, who had initially been suspicious of Sarah's abilities, became one of her strongest advocates. She worked with Sarah during off hours to develop training programs that would help other officers improve their shooting skills. "You know," Davis said one afternoon as they reviewed shooting drills, "I think your greatest contribution might not be your own abilities, but your capacity to help others develop theirs." Sarah found this idea appealing. Teaching others gave her a sense of purpose that pure marksmanship couldn't provide. 3 months later, Sarah graduated from the police academy with honors. Captain Reynolds offered her an immediate assignment to the Specialized Operations Unit, but she chose to spend her first year in regular patrol duties, working in the Community Policing Division. During her off-duty hours, she continued training with the tactical team and found herself being called upon for increasingly complex situations. Her first hostage situation ended with all civilians saved and suspects apprehended without serious injury. Her precision shooting abilities allowed for solutions that would have been impossible with conventional tactics. But it was during a routine community policing assignment that Sarah discovered the most satisfying application of her unusual gifts. While working with at-risk youth at a community center, she began teaching basic target shooting with air rifles as a way to build focus and self-discipline. The young people were fascinated by her abilities, but more importantly, they responded to her teaching methods and the confidence she helped them develop. Sarah realized that her exceptional skills were most valuable when used to lift others up, rather than simply demonstrating superiority. 6 months into her police career, Sarah received a call from Dr. Kellerman with news about the investigation into her background. "Sarah, we've found some interesting information about your family history. It turns out that your great-grandfather served as a sniper in World War I, and your great-great-grandmother was known as an exceptional hunter who provided meat for her entire community during the frontier period. So there might be a genetic component after all? It's possible. But more importantly, we've discovered that exceptional marksmanship abilities sometimes skip generations and appear to be triggered by specific environmental factors. Your childhood activities may have awakened inherited potential that might otherwise have remained dormant." Sarah smiled at this news. It felt good to have an explanation that connected her abilities to her family history rather than government programs or genetic experiments. "There's something else," Dr. Kellerman continued. "We'd like you to consider participating in research that might help us understand how to identify and develop similar abilities in other people." "What kind of research?" "Working with children who show early signs of exceptional coordination and spatial awareness. Teaching programs that might help others develop precision skills for various applications." Sarah felt a surge of excitement. This was exactly the kind of work that appealed to her, using her abilities to help others rather than simply being exceptional herself. As Sarah hung up the phone, she looked out the window of her apartment toward the academy grounds where new recruits were beginning their training. She thought about her journey from confused social worker to confident police officer with specialized abilities she was still learning to understand. The path hadn't been what she expected, but it had led her to exactly where she belonged, helping others while serving her community in ways she had never imagined possible. Her extraordinary abilities were no longer a burden or a mystery, but tools she could use to make the difference she had always wanted to make. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she could still sense that feeling of having done all this before, as if her unusual journey was actually a return to something that had always been part of who she was meant to be.